this is not for others because for me, and I think Dr. Nyla knows me over the years, I've never been one who's eager to take what you call titles or positions of what you would call, some people call the leader guys. I don't reject that. I think that's the spirit of others. I'm a good fisherman. I will go out and get the people. And for all these people that need these positions and powers, etc., to satisfy whatever spirit of ego they have, you can have the throne. I'm out here doing the work. That's my position. I don't need titles. But I do support anyone that's helping to heal the nation. I'm making that very clear. And keep in mind, faith and credit is a commercial system that's operating for the most part or at Midgard under the commercial operations of the Uniform Commercial Codes. I'm more harmonic with getting back to nature and the true history of the ancient Kemites, Moabites, etc., which is the gold and silver in harmony with the sun, the moon, and the stars, etc., which is the actual monetary system, and the right of heirship to the land, which is the power and the source of the resources. I'm more interested in an approach from that perspective because credit is debt. I'm not interested in indebting our people. I'm interested in restoring their estate because our people should not be in debt to any foreigner. But I understand that how the credit systems operate. I do understand and comprehend that. However, I don't necessarily promote that. I'm going for the whale. I don't want the whiting fish. Though I like whiting fish. I'm for a restoration of the estate so that these issues, my position is this: why put our people in a position to be credited to a foreigner who's been robbing them, who's never honorable, and has no intention of being honorable, on material estates that belongs to them in the first place? And then we're going to have them process or have someone acknowledge full faith and credit, which is a debt system. I don't say that it's not to be used. It's fine in what you call an honorable system. But I just read to you, King Alfred, that's their policy. And this is the reason why, like when you see over the years, all of the Asiatic people, whether you're dealing with many of the different tribes of Moors here in the Western Hemisphere, everybody that has made any agreement with them, whether they're building casinos or taking some reservation or taking some other separate piece of implied sovereign operations, they've all been betrayed. And the credit system was actually used to put them in debt on their own land. Without being honest about these dynamics is to be, to me, spiritually corrupt. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't address some of these things in our processes of rising. But I'm very clear to put everything in its place.
Okay, so we have another comment question. We'll bring it. Dr. G, please ask Taj to address the Supreme Grand Council issue that people are saying, falsely, I believe, that he is ignoring.
I'm not ignoring anything among our people. I've been doing this for about 40 years.
Supreme Grand Council issue.
Because the Supreme Grand Council is actually rightfully with Moors coming together, which they should do logically, and all activities basically should be transparent and to the public, with manuals available to the public relative to diversity of their positions under consular principles that are established in fatwa, in Muslim law, etc., that are adopted in constitutional principles and treaty operations called consular venues. And what you find is that people, the common people, to whose birthright that we're all addressing, aren't even aware of it because they're not teaching them. The people are more interested in positions and titles and controlling people. And I'm saying people that need that, have fun. It's not what I do. I understand fundamental building constructions. You give me time, and materials, put me on a piece of land, and I'll build a castle without anyone else's help. All I would need is material, whether it's the electric, whether it's the masonry, whether it's the plumbing, whether it's the furniture, whether it's the roof, whether it's the tile, whether it's the custom shelves, whether it's custom furniture, whether it's sewing, etc. I can do it all, and that's a fact.
And that I can attest to.
So I look at the reality of our relationship with nature, and I measure things by that. I don't measure by people's egos or positions because 90% of the time, let's look at this reality. 90% of the people in almost every position of so-called leadership has more or less, in some ways, a cadre of people around them that admire them or serve them, but the greater broad spectrum of the people of the land, of whose birthright everybody's speaking of, have neither a connection to them and are not aware of them, because most of them are secretive with what they do among themselves and use it as a point of power to impress people, and are actually doing very little to none for the community at large. Now, this is not to say that that's not their intention. I'm saying if there's something relative to the right of the people, it is public and it's transparent. And it is available to be known, even if it's not known. It's not something that we need to always have in some private conversation where we're empowering each other to so-called rule the affairs of our people when they don't know the rules of the game. I'm more interested in fishing the people and making them aware of the rules of the game. If they choose to start taking their places among the affairs of men, which we should do and should be about, and logically we have to set up or restore, because not so much setting up, restore councils among our people, etc., which are the nature of our customs and traditions. I'm all for that. However, and it's not a reluctance, or it's not a condemnation. I want to see more of the people that know the real history to produce literature and make it readily available to all of the people. Whether they accept it or not is not my argument. Made available to them, that whosoever will, let them hear. Whosoever will, let them come. And for those who come with knowledge and with comprehension of what they're dealing with, you can take those people and repair the nation. That has always been my position.
As a comment shared from Monica Love, we cannot do work, Grand Sheik, without house cleaning. We must tighten our circle and publicly out the agents that mislead.
You got that absolutely right. 100%, and that's part of the healing, isn't it? And I'm so glad you made that statement, because it's so true. And if you look at the history, particularly the contemporary history of many people trying to repair us, and one figure in particularly, our illustrious Prophet Noble Drew Ali, and the foundation that he set for the restoration of our state. And he has had opposition on so many fronts with people around him. However, the principles laid down by him for us and the restoration of our state and our land and our nation, etc., have proven to be absolutely correct and true. And he always reminded us, so that we don't get stagnated. He would say that the half has not been told. If I told you everything, you would go back to sleep. He says, study yourselves. And when you had studied well and would ask me what to study next, I would reply, study yourselves. And of course, when you actually do that, you start making discernment. And when people start participating in national reparation willingly, on knowledge and not on emotion, not on clubism, not on doing what you call a salami baloney adoration of leader guys sitting on some throne, etc. Not that I'm condemning that, etc. Guess what? You're not going to have anything. You're going to have what we've been having. All these generations passing with these principles having already been laid down and not carried out. And people pretending they got to reinvent the wheel rather than fixing or repairing the house. And I'm telling you, that's the major problem. Be honest about us all. Most of the people that have come and gone have been more preoccupied with their egos and with their images and with raising finance at the expense of the poor, and have done some good, but in fact have done limited reality of really restoring fundamental civic knowledge. And you hear people left and right talking about nation this, nation that, nation of this, nation of that, and then don't teach nationality, which is an absolute contradiction, because it's a lot of work, and it indeed is, because we have an injured people. Yes, we do. But you must be real about that. And so my principle is, I'm not unlike a carpenter I'm repairing a door right now. Those principles of carpentry apply all over the world. It's not going to be fixed with belief or emotion. It's going to be fixed with knowledge and dedication to the principles and a knowledge of the materials that are used and that are necessary to make such repairs. Doesn't operate on, oh, we need sandwiches. Well, good. If you can't cook, there's tough cookies. Get somebody who can. And all I'm saying is, I'm a fisherman. I'll catch the fish. You all do the cooking. I ain't arguing it. I don't need the titles.
Here we go. Yella Menra Whirlwind says the Moorish movement is not a social club. It is to be taken seriously, because being undesirable is not acceptable.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Absolutely. And again, when you start studying during the contemporary history of the people working to restore and to fix some of the injury among our people, that psychology has been allowed to take root without challenge. And so we find ourselves going in circles in many areas, because people have adopted the idea that it's a religious belief and not the restoration of a lost estate. And so the way they approach it has been flawed. And then very often people have been taking a position of either or, rather than looking that it involves all of it.
So BIHM the third asks, how do you fix the people?
Number one, knowledge would be the first thing I would say. And a research, and I always, as you all know, over the years would give people reference points whenever I present something, or some people like to call it receipts, so that the information becomes their own. Because when people keep or people are given a philosophy or position by different people who are going against the grain and exposing certain information that's otherwise suppressed, they have a tendency to look at that being as the source, when the real deal, when it's looked at that way, they don't recognize that it's actually their birthright information. And this is where you get so many of our people getting caught up in the imagery of people having titles, rather than looking at how much of the actual work that is necessary to be put in place to restore those titles by necessity of service to the people, is how we should be looking at this. Excuse me.
There's a question for you to define estate.
Estate. Now, this is essentially, and keep this in mind, while I'm going to go into estate and status, I want you all to write down land, as we've talked about before, and do the research on your own, so that you can relate to this. So now when you're talking about nation, people, restoring our nation. So when you're talking nation, you're talking about the living divine beings manifest in human flesh. And with that natural being, you would refer to in personam jurisdiction. When you're talking about the subject matter of any operations of structure of institutions that are put in place to structural formulate, to maintain, sustain, and support the structure of nation, now you're talking about subject matter jurisdiction. And when you're talking about the restored land, or the aggregate land or motherland, etc., that people fly their vixillum on, and vixillum is known as your flag, etc., sometimes referred to as flying your colors, etc., that's territorial jurisdiction. All of those things must be in place, and all of those things must be taken into consideration, and an honorable approach of the people of recognizing their estate and their bloodline to have a spiritual connection to it, because people won't defend that which they don't feel is theirs, etc. And these things have been removed from our people. So let's talk about estate. Estate is the interest which anyone has in lands or in any other subject of property. So it is essentially an estate is in lands, tenements, and hereditaments. Write down hereditaments. Signifies such interest as the tenant has therein. It is the condition or the circumstances in which the owner stands with regard to his or her property. In this sense, quote unquote, estate is constantly used in conveyances in connection with the words, quote unquote, right and rights, quote unquote, title, quote unquote, interests. Keep all this in mind, and is in a general or great degree synonymous with all of them. So estate relates to rights, titles, interests, etc., land, hereditaments, tenements, etc. And so now you're talking about making the distinction, which our people need to be aware of what is known as a allodial right of claim, or what is known as aboriginal title, which would be distinguished from mortgages and deeds. There are two different areas. Are we clear? So that's important. And so the degree or the decree of quality, the nature, and the extent of interest which a person has in real property, and comprehend that real property is not what you call real estate. There are two different categories. So in real property is usually referred in to us and as an estate. So when you're making reference to an estate, you're talking about all inheritances. You're talking about all hereditaments, which would include the corporal as well as the incorporeal. Therefore, you're dealing with your traditions and customs that supersede Roman law, that supersede legislated law, but harmonize what is known universally as, quote unquote, the common law. So the common law comes from the customs and traditions of established right of inheritance and hereditaments, which are related to your estate, and often referred to in Asiatic, African, Berber culture and history as the house of. As an example, if you say, like if I'm referring to the estate of Dr. Naila, in African culture, we would call it the house of Naila. And so when you hear that term or that phrase, the house of, you're talking about the estate of. It encompasses so broad an area that the everyday being is not informed of. This is why you see me take so much these positions over the years that I take, because I know these things must be fixed with our people if you're going to repair them or help repair them. Because remember, they themselves must be willing. Because if the will and intent is not there, you're not doing anything but bringing dirt back into your house that needs to be repaired. And so even like you see when Noble Drawley set up the old Canaanite temple, he said, with these lessons, you can get your house in order. So to get your house in order is to get your nation in order. you look at the constructive carpentry and building principles are actually the same. You're just dealing with what is called the corporal and the incorporeal, and thus you would call it the aggregate and the abstract, or the concrete and the spiritual, or the physical and spiritual. Those principles are synonymous in linguistic form to demonstrate both the aggregate or the physical realm of civil operations, as well as the principled law or positive law and legacy operations that support, i.e., the moral, or what you call moral, ethical, spiritual maintenance of that. And that's where morals and ethics come in. And also usually presented under what you would call religious or operations or philosophical operations. And this is where you have the divine and national movement. It is taking in consideration the natural operations of the divine sovereign right of the human experience. That's fact. And so when you study what Noble Drawley did, all of these things were actually taken in consideration. And so people often recall him or call him Professor Drew. And people who haven't necessarily studied his work intently or analyzed it, including remembering where he said the half has not been told, miss it when they get caught up in the emotional approach that many people take in relationship to Noble Drawley and the Moorish Divine and National Movement. So the hereditament principle of the corporal and the incorporeal must always be taken in consideration. All right, now in relationship to estate, we continue. In another sense, estate designates the property, real or personal, in which one has a right or interest, the subject matter of ownership, the corpus of property. Thus, we speak of a valuable estate, all my estate, quote unquote, separate estate, quote unquote, trust estate, quote unquote, etc. Now, thus, also, estate in its meaning in the classification of property into real estate and personal, quote unquote, estate, etc., is demonstrated over the years in many so-called case laws that will support the actual clear, distinct meaning, causal action in relationship to estate. And so the word estate is a word of great extension and comprehends every species of property, real and personal. Estate describes both the corpus and the extent of interest, etc., all together. And so that is important. So when estate is used in some connections, it signifies everything of which riches or fortune may consist, etc. And it goes on, but that should give you a rough basic comprehension of estate. And so in that nature of estate, as we've always told people, always relate it to your status. And so we're going to go to status to show you its relationship to your estate. Because often it is not necessarily taken in consideration until someone points it out to you. And this is why I've always taken the position of doing the work. I don't need a title. We need to do the work. Everything will fix itself. In other words, if you fix the house, the wind will stop coming in. So will the culprits. Get your house in order. Status is the standing, the state, or the condition. Status is the legal relation of the individual to the rest of the community. Status involves the rights, the duties, the capacities, and the incapacities which determine a person to a given class. Status is a legal, personal relationship, not temporary in its nature, nor terminable at the mere will of the parties, with which third persons and the state are concerned. And while the term status implies relation, it is not a mere relation. Why? Because status also means estate. Status means estate because it signifies the condition. It signifies the circumstances in which one stands with regard to his or her property, etc. That is very, very clear. Status and estate are related. And so when you come into the status, this is where identity of pedigree is very important, commonly known on the planet as nativity or nationality, which ties you to a descended estate of people related to an aggregate part of Midgard or Earth, etc. That's the aggregate soil. And now you have what is known as aggregate or territorial jurisdiction matters, which comes into place. And this is where the titles play part in, where the sultans or the emirs, etc., or the empresses have jurisdictional authority over an identified territorial jurisdiction with identified officers applied or assigned by the sovereign right of the people, clearly known and publicly known, to deal with jurisdictional powers that are clearly written, clearly known, not hidden, not veiled, not vague, in relationship to any other counterclaim that may be made by any other feudal lords or others, etc., making claim of heirship on lands or estates or hereditaments that have no right vested in them, i.e., which is a knowledge that counters colonial operations of claim, which is what we're suffering from right now. This is back where the work needs to be done. So keep that in mind. So when Noble Drew Ali told the Moors to, if they don't do anything else, declare their nationality, he's actually tying us politically back to our lost estate. But then the knowledge that goes with it, that causes that what you call honorable allegiance, etc., must be in place, that the heirs who would be loosely referred to, and not always properly, but loosely referred to as the nationals, and then sometimes as the subjects or citizens, etc., would have a known pattern or knowledge, documented knowledge of allegiance to that nation state, etc. All of those principles must be in place, and that is part of the healing. So you must know some of these things that were removed from us to put us in this social political position so that we could be vampirized or exploited by colonial operations under the unum sanctum operations, which is in fact not an opinion. That's what's been going on. That's the mission of the reparations, etc., under the establishment of the Moorish Divine and National Movement to refer to or to imply the obligations that already exist before you were born to be enforced. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to activate the law supreme of the aggregate land that was already in place but has been breached, trespassed against, and ignored. And people are ignoring it because people keep wanting to be they want 5 feathers in their fez, and so I'm the new emir of the territory type thing. Well, it's fine if that's what you need, but I say if this other work is not being done before the title is taken, or even while it's taken, in council with the people, with publications to support it, etc., we're going to continue to have these problems. So I'm not condemning, I'm supporting. But I'm also saying I'm also pragmatic, realistic, and I'm saying the reparation and the healing of our nation has no place for ego, has no place for the desiring of a title, has every place for workers. And I'm a fisherman and a carpenter and a builder, and I use those principles in my everyday affairs.
Aaliyah Bay asked me to ask if you know what the blue kachina is surrounding the sun.
Patina?
Kachina, the blue kachina. I believe that has to do with the Hopi.
Oh, or what we call the energy, or you would,
They were talking about that as a symbol, I
or
believe, of
or what we
sign of
sometimes
something was.
refer to as the nimbus, or we
No,
call it.
the blue kachina. There's like a return of when that appears. It's supposed to signal.
Oh yes, well again, that's the energy that we also call, some people call it the return of the white buffalo type thing, and we're actually talking about the coming of the new age or the evolution, because humanity is actually going through an evolutionary stage, and some people will call it the Christ degree, or where the activation of the pineal gland. Some will call it the Kundalini. Some will call it the Nirvana. But essentially, some will call the new era of time or the age of Aquarius, etc. All of those references actually the activation of the pineal gland or the Christ degree or the Christ degree. And the fact of the matter is, like all other living operations on the planet, the sun has that effect on also the evolution of man. This is again why over the years we mentioned, particularly in most recent times, people need to recognize that after, as the firmament of Midgard has gone through the Futon belt, you notice that the sun is whiter, less yellow, more white. And so that means you have less constriction of the debris that has made up the Futon belt, and so you have actually different energy. But even with that, not unlike the seeds of plant life, etc., there's an activation in the evolution of man spurred by the energies of the planets, etc. And this is where you get Cosmo, or what you call the crescent and the star symbolism, which is also symbolizing the sun, the moon, the stars, and the effect of them, their energies on the planet. And so when you look at that nimbus, or what you call that halo around the sun, and the changes that take place, you would talk about the era of time, or the arriving of humankind on another evolutionary scale. And this is also why it is comprehended that while we're doing a lot of analysis of what you would call moral and ethical construction of government, it is for the exercising of the mind, but we also recognize is so that we'll release some of these things from the old Piscean era that we have adopted, knowing that while we're studying them to comprehend what got us to where we are, a lot of those things we will not be doing in the future. In other words, we're evolving, to keep it simple.
Here's a question, one other question from Abdul Bay TV. Wants to know if it's true that many politicians are locked up in Gitmo by Mr. T.
Well, as we've told people in these last few years, and particularly in these last 4 years, when we reminded people, and some people have taken it wrong, that Donald J. Trump is assigned. And one of the things that people need to know when they're talking about, as an example, the Abraham Lincoln administration, when the members of the Circle Church and Chancery of the Bar Association infiltrated the Congress for the Republic with the intention of overthrowing, which is one of which the assassination of Abraham Lincoln was part of that covert activity, etc., and converted, overthrew the Republic, thus their obligation to treaties and Constitution to enforce the Inquisition operations, and people will just cover it up with the statement saying that they changed the Republic to a corporation. No, that's a lie. They had no authority to do that. The deal of it is the Republic still stood. It's just that the people who are the Republic were being attacked, and many of us lost knowledge that all this foundation of this estate operations here, that we are the rightful heirs. And then we, over the years, have been misdirected by COINTELPRO operatives, which is a later name given to, say, Boule operatives and many of your minions who have been working for Rome, who sent our people on this civil rights march all around the place, Negro citizen BS crap that has actually designed under the 14th constructed amendment that was never properly ratified in order to steal the birthright of the Moors. And under the guise of naturalization, not nationalization, naturalization, from a legal perspective, the Moors lost their nationality. However, I always challenge scholars to prove the existence of a so-called U.S. identity card of citizenship, which never existed. And so there's an implied contract of obligation of service to a de facto corporation political system of body politics of the Bar Association of British Accredited Registry, and thus accepting a debt for national services that were never actually executed because we cannot be and never were citizens of the U.S. corporation company, but we're in fact under corporal colonial operations right on. And of course, this is where the restoration of the right of estate comes from with the Moorish Divine and National Movement, with the restoration of the lost estate of the Moors. And of course, by people not knowing the political background, they have a tendency to look at the Moorish Divine and National Movement only from a pseudo religious perspective. And this is why there's, in many instances, a lot of schism that exists within the Moorish movement over these decades, for people having a lack of knowledge of what the real politics are. And they would take a perspective based on leader guys who take positions of sheiks, grand governors, etc., without consideration of the real obligations of diversity of nationality and the distinguishing of the legitimate platforms of controversy relative to persons and property in relationship to diversity, particularly Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, with the enforcement of all treaties, and Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States, with the obligations in place for the enforcement of all treaties, etc., being the supreme law of the land, which has not been taught to the people, and therefore very often their concept of looking at that Constitution has been wrong, not comprehending that the Constitution and the presidency is the obligation of those corporate foreign bodies doing business at Morocco, and limitations of their jurisdictional powers in relationship to both the people of the land and even to their own members, etc., with all treaties in force. This is again why many people, when they're talking about nation states, etc., they will always bring up titles, but they won't bring up the issue of diversity and explain it clearly to people, and also the lawful venue by which those things are executed whenever there's a controversy between persons or property relative to status and estate, etc. That's where you see in the Constitution, and I suggest that many of you who are out there read Article 3, that's the judicial platform for the Republic, and you will see that the lawful courts that were set up under the jurisdiction of the United States is ambassadors, diplomats, and consulars. And when you're dealing with treaty enforcement, logically, that is consular court. And this is, again, why people who really know this have been offended over the years of me promoting the restoration of the activities of Article 3, courts of diversity of consular venue relative to diversity of nationality, to properly address the issues of the Aboriginal people of the land, because that's the established venue. And of course, people who have been benefiting from perpetrating the Bar Association pilfering of our people, logically, politically don't support that, although it's written right there, and try to present the dogmatic position that I made that up, or they say that the people who have been listening to some of the things that I've taught would say, oh, they're Tajites, rather than do the research for themselves and see that you have traitors among your own. And this is back to what Sister was talking about earlier. Because this is, again, why we always try to share information with the people, because the people must clean up their house, and they must shed themselves of these parasites and opportunists among our own who have been pretending to love our people. This is why you'll see many of them that when you get into the details of this information, all of a sudden with them, Noble Drawley is no longer the prophet. And you'll see them making statements like that. Why? Because it exposes them, because they're traitors. And that's not opinion. You do research and you'll see it for yourself. And this is again why we've had difficulty over the years. And of course, people among the nationals of the land who are not aware of the real history get caught in personalities rather than looking at the principled facts and then measuring or vetting the people accordingly. And because many people have not been truthfully and properly teaching the principles of nationality and the relationships between government and nationals and citizens and the different statuses and subjects, etc., and it has not been made clear to them, they get caught in this gray area. And that's what has allowed these opportunists and thieves among our own who have been secretly working for the Bar Association to pilfer our people for hundreds and thousands of notes, etc., under the guise of commercial credit systems, etc., under the guise of rescuing them to their estate, when in fact they are the heirs of the estate. And so they have them buying and selling aspects of their own estate from foreign European courier members of the Bar Association and their helpers among our own who've been pilfering our people and, of course, prolonging the problem. And like the sister says, we're going to have to start shedding these people, and we're going to have to start recognizing that and stop taking things personal and start vetting people according to principle and stop making this stuff complex, because it isn't complex and never was. Just because the Bar Association made a law process complex artificially in order to deny our people due process, and keep in mind, justice delayed is justice denied. And keep in mind, the fundamental principles of supreme law of the land are to be put in place, easily recognized, comprehended, and within the capacity of the average man, woman, and intelligent child to comprehend. And they have made all of this stuff complex. This is why, even again, as Dr. Naila set up close and personal, as we did the last time, I shared with people Chapter 1 of American Law, Government Law and Sovereignty, because also the priesthood and the politicians have been putting a bad spin or a negative spin on people who even mention the word sovereign. Because that's divine. That's not given to you by government. Keep that in mind. They don't want you to know that. They think that's some kind of privilege if you sign some commercial agreement and make some financial statement to receive credit from the Bar Association through the Jesuit order of the Federal Reserve to get some credit notes from them, and then be able to do some transacted business rather than tying you back to your actual lost estate, which they've been living on at your expense as belligerent fofers under the guise of trustee. This is again why they don't teach trust law. So their motive is not honorable. But of course they know that people that don't know these fundamentals get caught up in, I follow this person. You don't follow anybody. What you do, you study what people do and let it become your own and do some cross-reference and research. Then you get together with other honorable people, getting the worms out from under you, the parasites from around you, the narcissistic title holders from around you that are more interested in guiding their hands into your pockets than they are in liberating the people. And this is again why over the years, because I already know people will go through developmental stages. And I've always reminded people, some of the things you do today, you will not be doing tomorrow. But I also know that our people need to go through some of these experiences. And at the same time, I also was aware that the time would come that the nations of the earth would stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds, and you would have the feedback loop, which I've been telling people for years. And so now you got all these trade embargoes. And so now people are starting to feel it, aren't they? So you're not going to have to keep on arguing with these people to make them comprehend what Noble Drawley did when he established the Divine National Movement, because it has a purpose. And now you can also see those who have been countering it because it's becoming more and more obvious because it's coming to the surface, and you can discern for yourself. My concern and my energy is involved in bringing up certain issues that help people make discernment, so that people, by their own will and intent, can help fix this thing, because it's your birthright. It's not somebody's good idea that you're a club member to. And it's so important for that to be clear to you. And this is also for people over the years that keep trying to assign me to things that my mother didn't assign me to. My mother assigned me to what I'm doing. I'm a fisherman. I'm a carpenter. I'm a builder. That's what I do. And for those who have those skills, and if that's what their mother made them for, go ahead and do it. More power to you.
I'm trying to get to that one. There were a lot of questions in here pertaining to how one should nationalize. I mean, because there's probably as many responses.
Make that very clear to me.
How? I mean, they're literally questions about how to nationalize. And so.
Oh, yeah. Now, and this is, give me that treaty book again, please. Yeah, very important. Because this is very important. And this is what people need to understand or comprehend. And again, I will remind you how this stuff is often redundant. Now, as far as the Naturalization Act, and now this goes with the citizenship, and as you all know, that they're having problems here, not only at North America, but around the world, with territorial jurisdictional issues being breached, and people in the political realm being forced to address it. And they'll call it foreign innocent immigrants coming across the Mexican border or the Canadian border